I want to begin by saying that I've been writing this story for most of my life. Grief and her sisters, anxiety and depression have always been around the periphery for me, hovering there throughout my childhood and beyond. I have very vivid memories, in fact, of my uncle losing his wife and 6-year-old child in a tragic car wreck at Christmas time. I remember my grandmother losing her husband of 50 years, first his mind and then his body to the disease of Alzheimer's. And then I remember my mom getting that phone call in the middle of the night that her oldest brother had passed, suddenly, unexpectedly, tragically. And so my immediate response then was to run like hell from all of that pain and all of that sadness. And I did immerse myself in the business, the literal busyness of life. And I don't think that's very different from a lot of people who deal with grief and their trauma response, because grief is certainly not limited to death and loss of life. We can experience those same feelings when we see the end to a friendship, or when we experience a job loss. Maybe we love that job and it's suddenly over. Maybe we simply feel lost and unmoored because of a pandemic. So in a lot of ways, I was escaping, and I really thought that I could outrun this. But you know what I did? I ran myself right into, slide is changing, to there. Oops, whoops, go back. There we go. Well, see, we're just going to roll with it. So this is Supine Woman by American artist Wayne Tybalt. And in my opinion, this perfectly captures the person that I thought I was and the life that I was living. By God, I was going to be bowled over by it. There was nothing going to be left in the tank at the end of the day. She is alive, but is she really? I mean, is this the way we want to live our lives? I mean, it's okay. You can nod or whatever. I personally realized that it's not going to be okay for me to continue living like this, because I was volunteering for everything. I was signing up for any and everything. As my family can tell you, if there was something to be done, my hand was raised and I was fully invested in it. But then in all of that, there was no time for my family. There was no time for me, and there was no time for the healing that I was clearly running away from. But let me assure you, it was catching up with me. And let me tell you, 2020, oh, you harsh and fickle mistress of a year. Ooh, let's just let that one sink in for a second. Really, really bad. And let's be clear here too. I lost a lot of folks between my childhood and 2020. I lost all of my grandparents. I lost my only sibling. I lost aunts, uncles, cousins, very dear friends in that span of time. None of you all are going to want to hang out with me afterwards, because you will see me as the widow of death. But on February the 6th of 2020, I lost my best friend. I lost my husband of 22 years. I lost Jeff. Guys, I went to work that day and I was a happily married woman, not a care in the world. And I came home that evening. I was lost. I was paralyzed with fear, and I was terrified because I did not know what was going to come next. And I came home as a widow. I hate that word so very vigorously and passionately. I hate it. And I really believe it's a failure of the English language, quite frankly. We can and we will do better if I'm involved. Again, I will lay myself out for this one. But I will say that stopped me in my tracks. I don't like being a widow, and it wants to pull me back, and it wants to immerse me right back in that grief. And it is terrifying even now to think about it. And it pushes me into feelings that are very scary, and they want me to continue to run. But I'll tell you, that day I shifted from this image to this one. This is Christina from Andrew Wyatt's 1948 painting, Christina's World. And like Christina, by God, I was well outside of the home and the life that I had so carefully curated. There was no question in my mind that was ever going to end, and yet it did. And so I'm outside of that, and I didn't see a way back to it. Not without Jeff there. What did that even look like? How was that even possible? And in the immediacy and the aftermath of Jeff's death, I remember just questions just running through my mind, racing through my mind. How am I going to raise our 2 children by myself? What does that look like? How do I plan a funeral? And way more importantly, what does that life look like after the funeral, when all of the cards have stopped and the casseroles have stopped and the Southern thing of grieving has stopped? And so it was terrifying. It was absolutely bring you to your knees terrifying. So, as much as I hate that word widow, let's put a pin in that one. I said, I've got to figure this out. And that's what's led me to this idea that I've come to call the third way. And it's a different way of thinking and embracing and working through those difficult and very traumatic, deeply painful times in our lives that we all encounter. And so what is the third way? What does that look like to live and to think there? And I like to think of it as living in the 4 to 6, that very middle ground. And our culture does not embrace that. Our culture wants us to be one or the other. It wants us to choose sides and pick teams and win at all costs. And we've all been there and we know that feeling. It wants us to say, ooh, are you the right or the left? Are you vaccinated? Or are you unvaccinated? Are you Roll Tide or are you War Eagle? So that's how deeply that goes. And it gives you very little room to do anything else. And so Catherine May's book, Wintering, appeared on bookshelves the very day that my husband died. And I picked up this book several months later, and I went through it and I realized wintering, like all of the seasons that we experience, is a time for us to reflect, to embrace, so that we can grow and allow that room for growth and give ourselves that grace to do so. Or, like me, you're going to continue to run unless you stop. So wintering is pivotal in that instance. And I consider it a season for me to winter through this. The third way also asks you, it says, maybe consider living without expectation. Live without that. Be open to what's coming to you. Also, live in the moment. Whatever is coming to you, open yourself up to it. Embrace it. That can be joyful and happy. By the same turn, it can be sad and painful. But open yourself up to it. Allow it to come to you and live through it so that you can heal. And then the third way also says it almost makes you be honest with yourself. And I am amazed even today at how much we want to deceive ourselves when we are going through these very difficult and traumatic experiences. You know, my body was definitely not in the same place my mind was running away. And so that's why this book, The Body Keeps the Score, The Brain, Mind, and Body and the Healing of Trauma by Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, it tells us that if we don't find ways to get rid of this trauma, it will come out in other ways. And let me be your living example of this. In the 18 months since Jeff has passed, I've lost my uterus, I've broken my first bone, and I've had a root canal. Does anyone want to sign up for that? Wait. It's hard to see you guys, but I feel like I don't see any hands raised. So let me be clear too, that this is very much a journey for me. I am still writing this story. I'm still telling it and I'm still living it because every day Jeff is still gone and I am learning from it. So the third way asks of you, you've experienced loss. You know you have, and it might be lost time or like lost relationships or connections or traditions you've had as a result of the pandemic. The third way says, consider ways to bring those back, to heal from those traumas, and to learn and grow. Thank you all so much.